On Thursday, we spoke with Archbishop Timothy Broglio, the Archdiocese for the Military Services. He oversees more than 200 priests serving as Catholic chaplains in the U.S. military, on bases and the battlefield. We began by asking about the situation in the Middle East and the spiritual guidance the Church is providing to service members who seek it.
We're dealing with a situation in the Middle East now, for example, where the chaplains are still in place, but many of the dependents have been moved to Europe or back to the United States. So they find themselves in a situation where the faithful to whom they were ministering are either gone or they're in hotels. So that changes the whole reality. And then there are others, of course, who are with the troops that have been moved in. And of course, their ministry in a certain sense is a little more regular, but it's still a challenge because of the situation. Given that you're a priest ministering to people in the military, I imagine much of your work, much of your focus is built around St. Augustine and the idea of just war, or when is war justified? The idea that it's only waged as a necessity and in order that peace may be obtained, and more broadly, perhaps, that the response is proportional. Correct. That's to gloss over pretty deep teachings, but essentially that's the root of it. I know that after the president, for example, threatened to take Greenland by force, you had said in an interview, it doesn't seem acceptable to invade a friendly nation and that such rhetoric tarnishes the images of the United States. You said it would be an illegal and immoral order to kill deliberately the survivors aboard an alleged Venezuelan armed forces. So given what's going on in the Middle East, I'm curious, is the war with Iran justified? I would think under the just war theory, it is not, because while there was a threat with nuclear arms, it's compensating for a threat before the threat is actually realized. And I think there I would line myself up with Pope Leo, who has been urging for negotiation. I realize also that you could say, well, with whom are you going to negotiate? And that is a problem. But in the meantime, lives are being lost both there and also among our troops. So it is a concern. And so if you're hearing from a service member who says, if your teachings, if your guidance is this is not justified, what am I to do as a Catholic who's in the service? And that's a very good question, because obviously the way conscientious objection is set up in the United States military, you cannot object to a specific war or a specific action. You can only object to, I'm opposed to war. So I would think it depends on where you are in the chain of command. Obviously, the Marine who's given an order, he's not in a position really to resist that order. I mean, he has to obey unless it's clearly immoral. And then he would probably have to speak to his chaplain, to his chain of command. The question might be, would generals or admirals have space to perhaps say, can we look at this a different way? Right. But having spoken to some of them too, they're also in the same dilemma. So I guess my counsel would be to do as little harm as you can, and to try and preserve innocent lives. And you're approaching this from a moral perspective. This isn't a partisan thing. This isn't ideological for you or geopolitical. You're a moral leader. So obviously, someone in the service who grapples with this will seek guidance from you and your brother chaplains. How often do they come to you talking about how to seek forgiveness, perhaps, for being part of this? That is actually something we've done a lot of work on as an archdiocese, the whole question of moral injury. So, I mean, even if you obey a legitimate command, but you have to kill someone, that's going to leave some traces in your heart or on your soul. And so there, we've tried to provide structures and help to people in that situation, to try and help them heal from those situations. And that's not a question of making a judgment. It's just a question of healing the individual who finds himself in that, or herself in that situation. Yeah. You obviously and your brother priests are
on Pentagon property, taking orders, obviously, through the military chain of command. There's been a lot of conversation in recent weeks, separate from the actual war itself, regarding the rhetoric of, say, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who openly invokes Jesus repeatedly when talking about the war with Iran especially, and has prayed openly from the Pentagon press room for blessings upon American service members. Obviously, his right to pray in public and however he sees fit. But what do you make of that sort of focus and sort of trying to cast this war as something that perhaps Jesus would justify?
It's a little bit problematic in the sense that the Lord Jesus certainly brought a message of peace, and also I think war is always a last resort. Now, they may have information that led them to think that was the only choice they had. I'm not making a judgment about that because I really don't know. No. But I do think that it's hard to cast this war, as something that would be sponsored by the Lord.
And that's certainly something the Pope has suggested himself, right?
Yes.
Not commenting on the secretary, but commenting on war generally. That this idea that if you're praying for the success of the war, what is it he said recently? He said, God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them. I mean, that would seem to put a lot of what's going on right now in conflict.
It certainly would. And I turn back to Paul VI, who made very few trips outside of Italy. But when he did come to the UN, he made that dramatic appeal, which I saw live on television as a little kid. Jamais plus la guerre, jamais plus la guerre. Never again war, never again war. And yet, that was in 1965, I think. Now, so many years later, we're still in this situation. So I think I would be in. I think Pope Leo would definitely support saying that we have to find a situation where men and women can sit down and find avenues of peace.
In our remaining moments, you obviously minister primarily to Catholic service members. But this is a holy season, Passover underway, Ramadan recently having ended, and ultimately on the battlefield, it doesn't matter to your brother chaplains whether they're Catholic or Protestant or Jewish. What's the interfaith dialogue like these days, especially at a time of war?
I think it's very healthy in the sense that there is a genuine desire to collaborate. I know most of the rabbis in the services because we frequently travel at the same time. For us, Christmas and Easter. For them, Passover and Hanukkah. Right. And they're fewer in number, so I certainly get to meet them. But there is a genuine spirit of collaboration, and there's a desire to facilitate the work of chaplains, and I think it's a very healthy thing.
Well, thank you for being here on this Easter weekend, and thank you, obviously, for your service, not only to the country, but to the faith. We appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.